As James said, I'm just going to present a brief overview of the work that we've been doing to create UK versions of the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways. And this reflects work of many different colleagues working together, both in the UK-SCAPE Speed project and the UK Climate Resilience project that James mentioned earlier. So just to start with a little bit of background about actually why we decided to develop UK versions of the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways, building on James's introduction. And this is mainly because we know that climate change won't happen in isolation. It will interact with continuing changes in social conditions, economic conditions, and political changes. And that can be in potentially complex ways. We also know that socioeconomic factors can determine the greenhouse gas emissions and the land use changes that actually cause climate change. But they also are extremely important to take into account to looking at climate risks because they affect our exposure on our vulnerability, but also our capacity to adapt to different climate hazards. So by developing UK versions of the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways, we're providing a set of plausible socioeconomic futures up to the end of this century. And they can then be combined with the climate scenarios to look at the challenging context in which the community can assess climate risks and also options around adaptation and mitigation planning. And the reason we started in 2018 through the UK-SCAPE Speed project was because at that time they'd recently been launched the UK Climate Projections 18, but there were no SSP versions for the UK to couple with the UK-CP 18 projections. So we recognised this as an important gap that needed to be filled. So what we did, we extended the global and European versions of the SSPs to create UK versions. And there were three types of extensions. First, spatially. So we used the global and European SSPs to provide context to create UK versions, but also versions that are applicable at the devolved administration levels, so for England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Second, temporally, because the SSPs globally only describe general trends for the 21st century. So we've added some temporal elements to look at how events might evolve over time within each of the UK versions of the SSPs. And then thirdly, sectorally, because at the global scale, we only have very broad indications on sectoral developments, and we've added a great amount of detail for the sectors, a range of sectors within the UK versions. We still follow the global framework of the 5 different SSPs, and we've developed UK versions of all 5 of the global SSPs. Our approach has been highly participatory, in that it's involved integrating both stakeholder and expert knowledge, and that's taken place in 2 main parts. The first is happened from 2018 onwards through the UK-SCAPE project, where we held a stakeholder workshop in Birmingham to develop narratives for each of the UK versions of the SSPs, and also trends in a number of variables, important socioeconomic variables. And that was followed by 2 questionnaires. We then had additional funding from the UK Climate Resilience Programme via the Met Office to have an additional project that was led by Cambridge Econometrics that involved ourselves and the universities of Edinburgh and Exeter. That allowed us to hold an additional online stakeholder workshop in 2020. Where we could extend and elaborate those narratives further. We significantly extended the number of trends that we looked at for socioeconomic variables, and we created a set of systems diagrams representing each of those narratives. We also undertook some semi-structured interviews that particularly focused on providing country-specific elaboration of the narratives for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And then again, that was followed up by a questionnaire. So I won't have time to go into the approach in great detail here, but I just wanted to show the first step in the approach, which was where we were asking stakeholders to suggest drivers that were particularly important and uncertain for determining the societal development of the UK over this century. And we did this in both the physical and the online workshops, and developed around about 700 different drivers that were then clustered into the 14 driver categories that are shown in the table in this slide. And those 14 driver categories form the backbone for all of the UK-SSPs, in that we ensure that aspects of those drivers are covered in each of the narratives and across all the other products that we have created. And they include elements of governance, both domestically and internationally. They include elements related to society in terms of its structure, public attitudes or demography, elements of economic development or technological development, and some really key sectors for the UK, such as natural resources, food, energy, and health. What we do is map those changes in those 14 driver clusters to the global SSP scenario framework. And then that allowed us to create 4 different products. And the first of these products is the narratives themselves, that provides a story of developments in each of the socioeconomic scenarios. They consist of a brief abstract and then a description of how events evolve over time in 3 time periods, from present to 2040, 2040 to 2070, 2070 to 2100. And then we have country-specific narratives that build on the main narrative and just focus on different specificities for England, Wales, Scotland, and for Northern Ireland. So in addition to the narrative, the second product was this set of systems diagrams. And these are system diagrams that help to visualize the narrative. They're not system dynamic models, but what they do is help users to visualize the interrelationships between those key socioeconomic driver clusters. So each of the nodes is one of the 14 key driver clusters that were identified by stakeholders. The lines between them emphasize the interrelationships between those drivers that evolve over time in the scenario narrative. And we have created animations of those as well, so you can see how the picture builds up over time as well. Our third product is tables of semi-quantitative trends in 50 different socioeconomic variables. And these were created to provide a link between the complexity of the narrative and the systems diagrams with the needs of the modeling community, where they might have needs to parameterize different variables as input to impact models. So what we have done is derive some trends directly from the global SSP database, some from in the scenario workshops, and some from the project team who used expert interpretation of the narratives. And they cover a wide range of variables, some related to societal development, such as population, aging, education, some related to more technological development, such as green technology and the diffusion of technology across society, some related to the environment, such as protected areas or fertilizers use, some related to the economy, such as GDP, funding transfers between the nations or incomes, and then some related to sort of governance and institutional structures, sort of the participation and the effectiveness of different governance and institutions. The outcomes look like these sets of graphs, where you get one per SSP, and the y-axis is categorical, covering 7 categories, from a very high increase to a very low decrease, and the x-axis covers the 3 different time periods. And they show just relative magnitudes and directions of change across the 3 SSPs in the 50 variables, with text underneath them to show the source of that trend, or to relate it to the narrative where it's being derived directly from the narrative. And then the final product is the list of variables that we've quantified into spatial projections. This work is still ongoing. It's led by the University of Edinburgh, involving Cambridge Econometrics, Exeter, and ourselves at UK-SCAPE. And the table here gives you an idea of those variables that we've already completed and those that are still underway. The project ends at the end of May, so all of these projects will be completed within just over a month's time. And just to note as well that all the variables, apart from land use, are climate ignorant. So we just assume the effects of socioeconomic and societal development on these variables, not the effects of climate change as well. The only one that is different to that is land use change, where it's difficult to ignore the impacts of climate change. Just to give one example again, because it's not time to go into detail, the resolution that we work each variable out at is dependent on what data is available historically. So we use the best available and most recent data. So this particular indicator on health is on life expectancy and birth, where baseline data is available for local authority districts. Our highest resolution is a 1 kilometre grid, and we provide the spatial data decadally from 2020 up to 2100. And the spatialization takes account of spatial changes in the narrative on whether the UK becomes more equal or less equal, or whether there's differences, for example, between urban and rural regions. So finally, we are developing an interface as part of the UK Climate Resilience Programme's project to make this data available to the community. The interface is based on the systems diagrams, where you can go into each of the nodes representing the key drivers and find out more about the importance of that driver within the narrative. You can click on the links between those drivers to understand the interrelationships with them, and you can go into those boxes to actually get data relative to the semi-quantitative trends, to maps of the spatial projections or the actual data of those spatial projections. We are holding a specific training webinar next Wednesday on the 5th of May, where we will go into much more detail on the 4 products, particularly on how you will be able to access them and to demonstrate that interface. So I'm hoping Jenna from the project is just putting the Eventbrite registration details in the chat. So if anyone hasn't registered for that and wishes to do so, they're welcome to come along, because for this workshop, we're going to mainly be focusing on access to the RCP-based climate scenarios. But just to conclude, what we've done with the UK-SSPs, we've developed, using a participatory approach, a set of UK socioeconomic scenarios that are consistent with the IPCC's community global SSP scenarios. And there are 4 main products: these narratives, which are 5 to 6 pages describing societal developments over time to the end of the century; system diagrams that help you visualize the interrelationships between the main drivers in those narratives; tables of semi-quantitative trends for 50 key socioeconomic variables; and then spatially explicit projections for 25 socioeconomic variables. And all of those products will be available by the 31st of May this year. And with that, I will just like to say thank you for your attention. Also to acknowledge again the great contribution from all the colleagues in both the UK-SCAPE projects and in the UK Climate Resilience Project, as well as all the stakeholders who we've interacted with throughout the last few years.